Hi, and welcome to the webinar, Navigating Grief and Loss in Adoption. This is part of our Navigating webinar series, which is one of the multiple series we have. So if this is the first time you are joining us for a webinar, welcome. If you are coming back again, welcome back. My name is Courtney Williams. I'm the host of America's Kids Belongs webinar series. And today we have an exciting lineup of two individuals who are very well versed in this area. We have Pam Bauer, who is a biblical counselor. And when she was going through her master's program, she wrote a thesis on grief and adoption. She's also an adoptive mom to 14 kids, has a lot of experience, and you are going to love hearing from her. And just honestly, one of the most impactful interviews I've ever had as far as being an adoptive mom and what she has taught me in thinking about the grief and loss of my kiddos and the things that I need to be considering and the conversations that need to be had. And then we also have Tyler Hunter with us, who's an adoptee. He is working on his master's right now. He's also a behavioral health and child welfare consultant, and he is super fun and energetic, and you will love hearing from him as well, sharing his story and also sharing some ways that we as adoptive families or potential adoptive families can think about the grief and loss, again, and the things that these kiddos go through, especially thinking of kiddos coming from foster care. But if you're here listening and you're adopting through different means, this will also pertain to the kiddos in your care. So let's get started.
Today, we have an amazing guest with us, Pam Bauer. And Pam is a mom to 14 kids, 12 who were adopted from Russia. Pam also has a master's degree in biblical counseling and wrote a thesis on grief and adoption. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today. Pam, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
At America's Kids Belong, we recruit families to be foster families, to be adoptive families. And then that happens. And then we often have families that are like, oh, crud. Now we're in the thick of it and we're struggling and we need help. So hoping that this sheds some light on that, into the why behind that happens, what people can do, and then even maybe gear them towards how they can look for counseling and therapy and stuff too, if they're at that point of we need help.
So while you were parenting 14 kids, as I understand it, you decided, let's go back to school and you get my master's degree, correct?
Correct. It was right after they'd finished homeschooling them. We were down to just a couple kids at home, and then that's when I went to get my master's degree.
Okay. And so your master's degree in the broad category is biblical counseling.
hmm
And you, for your thesis, focused on adoption, specifically grief through adoption, correct?
Right.
O-
Right.
Okay. So tell us about that and what you learned.
So it was a process. When you write a thesis, you cannot write on a topic another student's written on. So they had some of the big categories already done, but they really wanted me to write on adoption. So I pondered it. And the thought that kept coming to my mind is that there's something missing in the way we do adoption care with kids. There's just like a hole in it, and I couldn't figure out what it was. Having been through some of the best therapy in the country on attachment work and trauma and post-institutionalized children, I still felt there was something glaringly missing. And then one day, as I was pondering all of that, it occurred to me, if the young woman down the street had her husband die tragically, we would not show up 6 months later and say, here's a new man. This is a new husband. Now you just go ahead and have your old life. He's going to replace what you lost and just go forward with your life. But that is kind of what we do in adoption. I thought if a couple lost their child, we wouldn't show up on their porch 6 months later. Here's a new child that's going to replace the one you lost. And so go on forward with your life. And yet that was very strongly the message that my children had received coming out of an orphanage,
Hmm.
was that these are your forever parents. Your biological parents were not able to take care of you. These parents are going to take care of you. And so just go ahead and have a good life.
Hmm.
And there's no place in there for grief, because what they were attached to was who they were born to. And as I thought more about attachment, I don't think attachment is so much of a technical process like it's described in some of the literature, so much as we attach and bond to the people who help us with our greatest need. If you come in and really help me with something, I will be forever attached to you. We see that with battle buddies in the military, right? So if the child's greatest need is to deal with their grief, learn to trust, and learn how to live, then if you help them with that problem, they're most likely going to attach to you. And so instead of looking at their attachment as a problem, I instead look at their grief as an opportunity to help them. And I'm not afraid of grief because I approach it through the lens of faith. I know I have a God who comforts, and I know I have words that will help them. And so then we can deal with grief. And then the other part of it is keeps circling back around as children age and mature and develop and they can think better. Then they circle back around through the grief issues again. So some of the parents that I have talked to and counseled with over the years through adoption have all said, well, we've had these conversations with our children. Well, at what age? Well, we talked about it when we first got them. Well, now they're 9 and 10 and they understand abstract reasoning and they're starting to recognize what they lost. And we have to go through the grief conversations again at a higher level and address the issues that they bring up. So I have found that grief was a wonderful avenue for being able to help children through their greatest problems. And in the end, the people that I've worked with have said their children really have started to attach to them. And as I've gone back after the fact and talked to some of my kids about it, we're finding a lot more peace in our relationship too.
Hmm. Yeah.
So
Yeah, for sure. I'm an adoptive mom to six, and three of them are now out of the house and have flown the nest. And I definitely feel that the process of them understanding their adoption
yeah,
story and journey and healing has been outside of our house more than in our house. Um,
inside, yeah. You
yeah.
don't look old enough to have kids that are outside the house.
That's I've got four outside the house now, so but thank you. But yeah, it is just interesting, and the whole concept of us, you know, I have felt, we've adopted three through foster care, three internationally. And on the foster care side, things are a little bit different because parental rights are removed. So it's a little different process. Parental rights are removed, and adoption happens. And after the rights are removed, what we experienced was something called a goodbye visit. So they're supposed to have this last
Okay.
goodbye visit, right? It's the goodbye visit. Their rights are removed. There's no such thing as open adoption in foster care. It's their goodbye visit. And when people would know, people would ask us. They knew court process was coming up. They knew TPR, the termination of parental rights court case was coming up, and people would ask us, "Hey, how did it go?" And we'd tell them the outcome. We kept being told congratulations. And it was because we knew the birth mom. We knew her very personally. We loved her. And hearing somebody say congratulations that this mom has lost her rights and these children are now going to be adopted. I mean, I know where it was coming from, right? It was coming from they've seen us love these kids. They felt like the kids were better with us in a sense. And so they were telling us
Mhm.
congratulations, but yet not recognizing what this mom was losing, not recognizing what our kids were losing and how that was going to affect them for years. And so I became an educator. I started educating people on, please don't say congratulations to me because I love this mom and it is hard. And I don't expect my kids to look at this like they won a better family or, as something you're winning. Um, so how would you advise families who are going through this process? Maybe TPR just happened, or maybe they were just told they're able to adopt, of keeping these things in mind, where we need to keep the birth families in mind and keep these things, the loss that our kids are going through in mind, and not just look at it as we've won in this situation.
Right. I think it's important that we recognize that adoptive families and adoptive parents are looking forward. They've gone through the arduous work of getting through all the home studies and the court papers and whatever process they have to go through in particular for their adoption. And it is a long, grueling process. And there are a lot of people asking questions that frankly are none of their business in a normal, if you just give birth to a child kind of way. But it's a lot of work, and it's understandable that adoptive parents would be excited. And they're looking forward. We're looking forward to T-ball games and ballet lessons and recitals and graduations and family vacations and grandchildren. We're looking forward to this whole life that's going to open up. But our children are looking backwards on everything they're losing and how they wonder, will my mom be able to find me? How permanent? What do they mean by permanent? Will my mom find me? Because some of them are afraid and don't want to be found. Um, they might be wondering about who else they're losing. It might be a favorite grandma as well, or an auntie. Um, so the children are looking backwards. They cannot fathom the future that the adoptive parents are looking forward to. And we never dealt with birth parents because our kids were already in an orphanage. But I imagine birth moms would just be shattered. And I don't know how they can give up their child. I know it is a huge sacrifice for what's for the benefit of the child at great cost to a biological mother. And I cannot imagine her agony. So it is not a cause for celebration. And yet we know that adoption is an act of mercy to a child in need. And so, how do we blend all of those together? And I think when we're talking to our adoptive children, it's acknowledging that today might be hard and scary, but I'm promising you that there is a future coming, and someday you're going to look back and this will make more sense than it does right now. And I won't let you go. I did have one of my little girls come to me. I got her when she was 7. I think she was 9 or 10. And she came and asked if my birth mom showed up at the door and asked for me back, would you give her back to me? Would you give me back to her? I was like, what a tough question.
Yeah.
I told her, no, I'd fight tooth and nail.
Yeah.
I imagine that's exactly what she'd do too.
Mhm.
There would be
Yeah.
police involved.
Yeah.
But I think for how to respond to other people is that I would just tell them it's a day of a lot of mixed emotions. And you're right, there is joy and there is congratulations to be had, but there is also sorrow and grief to be reckoned with.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you touched on it a little bit, but let's talk about like what are some of the things that a child loses through adoption?
So, if I can back up just a titch before that, the grief is multifaceted. And so, one of the kinds of grief is called ambiguous loss. And it's the loss of things you don't know about that might show up later in time. So, you might have lost your mom and dad. You might have lost extended family. If you think of it in concentric circles, at the core, the smallest circle would be your biological family unit. But the next circle would be the holidays, traditions, customs, smells that you're familiar with, textures of fabric, food that you're used to eating. All of that goes. And if you're adopted by somebody else in your biological family, maybe an aunt, a lot of that stuff you get to keep. You still have the same grandparents. You might live in the same town, might get to go to the same school. But if you're adopted by someone in a different town, or if it's a big town, a different part of town, you don't go to the same school or the same church or the same community center. You're just totally cut off from everything you knew before. You might lose your toys, your favorite pet, um, a neighbor friend or a playmate that you really enjoyed. If you end up adopted internationally, which and cross culturally, which is the most dramatic form of adoption, you lose everything about your former life, your language, your customs, the values that your country had, and you may only know them from being a little kid, but still, I'm amazed at how much of the Russian mentality my children still have. And I got the youngest ones when they were 2 and 3 years old.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you lose a lot.
Hmm. Yeah.
And then you add to that an aspect called disenfranchised grief, which is where there's something about your grief that prevents you from getting public support. And for the adoptive child, what blocks that support is the joy of their adoption. You're the lucky one. You got
Yeah.
adopted. But that's the way the people that are not in the adoption world look at it. But it's not accurate because that
Hmm.
child needs a lot of support for the grief they're going through, as well as at the same time being able to be grateful that they're adopted. They have a home and they have parents. So
Yeah. A lot to think about. Um, for those listening, we lost our co-host Brian. He he messaged me and said that he's got kicked off the internet. He has no internet right now all of a sudden. So he might be back, he might not, but we'll just
dear.
move on. Brian is missing, but he might come back. So but we'll continue. So it also might be shocking for people to realize there are things that our adopted children think about that our biological children might not. And so for families who have both, there's some things that we need to keep in mind. So what are some things that you've experienced in this of things they think about?
Well, as I had mentioned, my little one coming up and asking if I would give her back. My biological children never think of that. They know we would fight tooth and nail if anybody came to try to take them. Adoptive children really struggled when people at the airport would talk to them. When you're a big family, you cannot be inconspicuous. You just stick out like a sore thumb everywhere you go. And so when we would travel and we would be at the airport and everybody would see all these little kids together, strangers would just come up and start talking to them. Now, a family with just two kids, strangers don't come up and talk to you. And many times my kids would wonder if these people were going to take them away, like we took them away from the orphanage because they didn't see that as being any different. My one daughter came up to me one day and told me she was very worried that she wondered if I would decide that I just didn't want a little yellow haired girl one day. I would never, that thought would never come into my mind. I'd think there was something wrong with me if it did, not or something wrong with her. Um, our children, I've had ones in their 30s tell me I've ruined their life because I took them out of the orphanage. And if I'd have left them there, their birth moms would have come and got them eventually. And it's like, it's just a different way of thinking, and you don't know what they're thinking. No matter how much you think you don't actually know unless they tell you and confirm what you think you know. So we were on a vacation once, flying to Hawaii with a bunch of our kids, and we had one of the boys that we just had adopted a few months before, and he asked me where we were going, and I'm using the Hawaiian Airlines magazine trying to explain to him what a beach is and what sand is, and wondering, is he just seeing brown and blue on this paper, or does he see water and sand like I do? I don't know. And at the end, he said, so when we're done, where are we going? And so we're going home. Back to our old house, he says. I said, yes, back to your old house, sleeping in your own bed. All of us? I said, yes, all of us, every one of us. Even you, Mama? And I realized in that moment he'd never traveled from one place to another location with his family intact when they returned home. It was a really sad moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have our two youngest were adopted. They're 5 and 7 now, and then our oldest, so our three youngest, and our three oldest are all adopted. But it's been fun to parent. Some of them we adopted as teenagers, and the things they've gone through, the things they've thought about, have been similar, but yet different than the little kids. The little ones that were adopted from young ages, and just the questions at different stages. I found, going to school is a big step. And that's where I feel like kids start
Yes.
asking a lot of questions. Then I feel like 9 to 10, all of our kids, when they hit 9 to 10, it's these questions come out. And then teenage years, like I feel like there's kind of these milestones in their lives where
Mhm.
the thought of being adopted, the questions of being adopted really hit, and they start to ask, a lot of stuff. Um, and so I appreciate you noticing and pointing out that there's a different of the things they're thinking about versus our biological kids and the things that we need to be ready for. I've sometimes felt like I have to parent my kids all exactly the same, or I have to think of them all exactly the same, or I'm making them feel less than or not equal to. And it's just not true. I mean, there are things that I need to recognize a mom, that are going to be different for my adopted kids that are for my bio kids. There are things that are going to be the same, right? There are a lot of things that are the same, but there are a lot of things that are different too. And not seeing that as an adoptive mom of, treating them differently, but more meeting them where they're at and understanding their needs. Um,
Even
so
even amongst our biological children, we treat them differently because we raise them according to what they need, and their
mhm,
needs are different.
definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And even the connection with them, the connection, my oldest daughter was adopted at 15 and struggled with just connection to me because she felt, and finally got to the point of being able to tell me, she felt like if she had a connection with me, that was disowning or not loving her birth mom. And
Yeah.
I kind of felt that, but I didn't say that to her. I let her eventually come out and say that, to be able to have that moment of saying, what would your birth mom want? Would she want you and I to have a close, healthy, loving relationship? Or would she want you to be so disconnected from me, not feeling like you have a mom at home? I'm never going to take over. She is your bio mom. She will always be your biological mom. And I'm not going to, I can't take over that role. I don't want to take over that role, but I want to be your mom that you have in the house, the motherly figure you have here. So yeah, can you speak to that a little bit about the feelings too that they have and recognizing those connections between your bio kids or adopted kids? It's okay.
It absolutely is. And I'll tell them, do you feel closer to some of your brothers and sisters than you do to other ones? And then they can acknowledge, yeah, relationships all have a different feel to them. And they don't have to be worried about divided loyalties. I told them, that place in your heart for your biological mother belongs absolutely to her and no one else. And I don't want that place. My question is will you make me a place?
That's good.
I said, just like I love my oldest daughter and there's a place in my heart for her, as I'm speaking to one of my other girls, I have made a place for you in my heart and it belongs to only you. And I keep it full of love all the time.
Yeah.
And so, will you do the same for me? But the divided loyalty is an issue that happens for a lot of children, children of divorce, children where parents are just maybe never were married and are no longer together. And you wonder when mom remarries somebody else, what does that mean about my dad? What does that mean about my new stepdad? And those I just always ask those kids, is your heart big enough that you can make a new spot?
Yeah.
And that seems to make a lot of peace because they realize I don't have to give my one parent's spot in my heart to another parent. So
Yeah. And in foster care, that's so real as well because oftentimes kids will come and go from your home. If
yeah.
it doesn't go to adoption, which is more common, they're going to be reunited with their families. And I'll hear that all the time from people. Oh, I want to foster, but I could never foster because, my heart's going to be broken or I'm going to love these kids. And it's like, yeah, you should love those kids for as long as they need and be willing to be. It doesn't need to be now and not later. No, you can still love that child even though they're reunited with their families or they're back with grandma or whomever it is. Yeah.
I want the best for them and know that
Mm.
you were part of that story of what was best for them.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of hope there.
Is there research done on how often do kids think about their adoption or think about their biological families?
Well, there is a really good research project or research that was done on grief in general, and it's called the Harvard Bereavement Study. And in that study, I'm trying to get to my notes so I don't misquote it. They studied, I believe it was 125 school age children for 2 years that came out of 70 families, so lots of siblings.
Okay.
And they studied them if they had lost a biological parent that lived in the home with them. So they have one surviving parent at home, and then they have lost another parent. And they found that there was a lot of information in there that's very significant for grief, but I think we can extrapolate from it some information that's helpful in understanding adoption. They found out that some of the things that help children the most is if they're free to talk about the deceased parent, especially with somebody who knew them. So if your mom dies, but grandma comes over every once in a while and you get to talk to grandma about your mom and she's got pictures of your mom or maybe home videos that you can watch and you can hear stories about your mom, it helps you stay connected and help those children survive the grief better. Our adopted children don't have any of that. It was also the biggest factor that would indicate how the children were going to do was the emotional, functional ability of the surviving parent. And while we may have very capable adoptive parents, they are not a surviving parent who went through the same loss with the child. So they don't have that either. And then part of that study also included how often do children think about their parents that they have lost. So if you were part of the Harvard study, it was a bereavement, but for adopted children, it's the parent that you've lost through termination of custody rights. They found out that boys think about their lost parent 5 times a week, and girls think about them multiple times a day, most frequently at bedtime. When all the distractions of the day are over, the room is dark, your mind is starting to be quiet, all those thoughts you were able to block out with distraction and busyness of the day, all of that goes away and you're left with your thoughts. So, no wonder kids struggle to go to bed at night. I wouldn't want to go to bed either if I knew I was going to go back to worrying about where my mom is. Is she cold? Is she hungry? Is my dad still beating her up or whatever the story was? Missing her very much and just laying in your bed at night by yourself. So I think one of the things that parents can do to help with that is have that intentional conversation because our adopted kids won't bring it up.
Yeah.
They also have a loyalty to their adoptive parents. They don't want to hurt our feelings by saying, I'm really missing my mom, because that communicates somehow you're not enough as a mom. That's what the child thinks that they're communicating instead of, no, you have two moms, you love them both. One of them's not here and you're missing her. It's totally normal. I have communicated to my children how much I value their birth moms. That they coming from Russia, abortion is absolutely legal there, and there's no social stigma or anything on it, even in the 1990s when we were adopting. And I said, she had another choice. Being pregnant's not comfortable. Childbirth certainly is not comfortable. She had another choice, and the choice she made was she chose life for you. And I am forever grateful to her for that.
Yeah.
And so, yes, you're free to love her. You're free to miss her. Let's pray together for her right now because we know God hears people's prayers. We also made sure that out of that Harvard bereavement study, they said another thing that was really helpful was if bereaved children could participate in the funeral or a ritual in some way to have a formal goodbye ceremony. So we've done that ourselves, plant a tree that blooms or blossoms at the month that they were adopted or the month that they were placed in placement, if we know when that was, or planting a rose bush that happens to be a favorite color, or putting a stone with a parent's name on it and planting it in the backyard where the child can see it, preferably outside their bedroom window. Um, we have been able to do annual letters, like, let's write your mom a birth letter and tell her how good you're doing this year, because she would want to know.
Yeah.
And we don't know how she would ever find this out or if she ever does, but we'll ask if somehow the Lord could let her know. And so I think having some of those kind of rituals that we can do, because most oftentimes the children didn't get to say goodbye, and they will repeat that over and over. I didn't get to say goodbye. Or I didn't understand that day when she said goodbye, it was goodbye forever. I thought it was just goodbye. She was going to the store or she was going to work. I didn't understand. And so being able to say goodbye, that I will love you forever. I will never forget you. I won't waste this life that you've given me. Um, I'll teach my children who you were. All of those kind of things would be really helpful for a child to be able to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it's a little different in foster care adoption because no, like I said, they at least in the state of Colorado, there was no such thing as open adoption after foster care. So, but we
Okay.
chose that. So, parental rights were terminated. We got to know birth mom. We formed a relationship with her, and we were sending her pictures. We were seeing her. We were spending birthdays together and holidays. Um, Unfortunately, just a month ago, we found out that she's passed away. Again, our kids are
Oh,
pretty little, so they're 5 and 7. So, just curious if you have any thoughts, even in talking whether it's just about adoption or if it's about, death of a birth family, birth mom or parent, because I've heard that from a lot of families that, that ends up happening after adoption and maybe the different ages. So thinking of like my kids, they're 5 and 7 versus talking to a teenager. Like, how would you talk to a 5 and 7-year-old about adoption or thinking with their birth families? Like, how would you go
I
about that
think
conversation?
I think it's important to talk to children about being adopted as soon as you get them, if they are adopted, so that there's never the day they heard the news. They always grew up knowing the news. Even if they don't understand what the words mean, they can repeat their story. And as they get older, those words start to have meaning for them. In the meantime, adoptive parents get to practice telling the child the story a few times when the kiddo's still young enough that you can stumble through and it's okay because you're going to tell them again next week. Um, just enough that they know it. Not that it becomes this is your whole identity, but this is the story of what happened. And as they hit the school age, early school age years, and we get to kindergarten and we all do the little plant the little seed in the cup and the plant grows and the flower grows. Then they start to we wonder where did that plant come from? Well, it came from the seed. It doesn't take very long before the child's asking, well, where did babies come from? Where did I come from? And we're going to tell them the true story that you grew inside another mom's womb and she could not take care of you. And so she found a mom who could. And so I am raising you at just as if you were my own. I love you like that, but you actually had another mother. When they hit about the 9, 10 years old, if her mom's died, I would tell the child that their parent did die. And we don't know, we don't know where they go, or we may not know enough about them to know if they were someone that we think is in heaven or not in heaven, and it's not our place to say. But to know that the Lord is watching out over her one way or the other. We can tell a child that confidently. Um, and then as they get to that school age year, about the 9 to 10 years that you mentioned, they start to understand cause and effect thinking. So not only are they starting to figure out biology, that something happened and something was created. There was the sperm and the egg, and then there was me. But they also start to understand the cause and effect that children usually stay with their biological parents, but I didn't. So 4% of the children in the United States are adopted. I don't know what percentage is in foster care. But it's enough. There might be another child or two at your school. You're not the only one, but not everyone. It's not half the population of your school, right? And then they wonder, well, what happened? But they won't usually ask their adopted parents about it. They do all of this processing inside their own head, which is why it's really important for us adults to have the conversation with them and to ask questions. And so, what do you think happened? Why do you think, what would you think could happen that a mom would have somebody else raise her child for her? And we do read stories about the little duckling and Dilly Duck and some of those other adoption books. Um, but generally, what they come up with is I was a bad baby.
Mm,
And so we have to take care of that one because that's a lie.
yeah.
And, I just tell them that it's just not true. Babies aren't bad.
Yeah, it's sad. I've shared this many times, but every single kid we've had in care in our home through foster care, every single one of them, and all of our adopted kids, 100% of them, by the time, if they're old enough to process these types of things, they have all said they felt that it's their fault that they're in care. That they did something wrong, or they weren't good enough, or they caused the substance abuse, or whatever it might be. They feel a shame and a guilt of it being them.
Yeah. And it's all a lie.
Mm.
If it doesn't get addressed, it plays out real badly in those 20s. Um, the good news is a lot of the time in the 30s, the adopted kids come back around and settle down and they'll say, well, I tried the rebellious way and I've just gone back to what you raised me with. Life works better that way. And I want to be part of the family again. So kind of just have to hold out sometimes for those 30s. Um, but I would just tell them the truth, if they're 5 or 9 or whatever, that their parent died, and that, one of the biggest concerns for parents is what's gonna happen to their children, and so it mattered a lot to your bio mom. It mattered to her that she would know that you were gonna be taken care of, and what happened to her had nothing to do with it. You were a blessing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm,
For the 15-year-olds, those older ones, and we can talk more about cause and effect issues, because sometimes the decisions are a little bit more complicated. Sometimes, if we have a high risk lifestyle, the incidence of death occurs at an earlier age, and it's a warning not to waste the life that you've been given, and also to know that decisions, choices have consequences. And that doesn't make your mom a bad person. It's just the consequences got her. Sometimes it's just violence that happened and they died. And and again, it's your mom would be so relieved to know that you're being taken care of, that we love you, that we want to help you, that you're doing well in school, that you have a future ahead of you. And I think that she would be so proud of you and helping them that way. So acknowledging that grief circles back sometimes on anniversaries. There might be times that are a little bit harder. There might be, my one son got married a few years ago, and his wife, her mother had died a few years before that. And it came time to make the montage of childhood pictures. And she just said, I can't do it. I'll be a puddle on the floor. Could you just please go through and pick out some of these pictures for me? And so I picked him out for her. I picked her childhood pictures to put in her wedding movie. because it was just too hard to watch she said, to see the pictures of her and her mom and to realize again all she lost and which mother was not there at the wedding that day.
Yeah.
So there are days when it's harder, and just to recognize that.
Yeah.
And then another thing with teens is sometimes that those crazy thoughts they think, right? They'll think, well, I'm not a child anymore, so I'm not adopted anymore. Now I
Mm.
don't have anybody.
Wow.
I was like, oh no, it's a life sentence.
Yeah.
You're stuck with me.
Yeah.
So we've had to have that conversation too. We've had the conversation about why, when I'm an adult, I have to move out and I can't stay home and have you take care of me. Well, you're not a child your whole life. And at some point, if you're not going to school, then you're to be working and starting to earn your own way. It's called growing up. It's not being kicked out of another family. One of my boys, when he was in high school, got very angry at me. We had a big argument, and his practice was to go for a walk. So I knew he was going to be our town's. I don't even know if it has a crime rate. Um, it's really pretty safe place. And he was out there walking around. And he finally came home at night, and he looked at me and goes, "You are not going to confess nor ask for forgiveness first. I get to go first this time." I said, "Okay, what do you want to tell me?" And he says, "I've done the math." He said, "If I let you in, by the time you're 80, I will be 40 and I will lose a second mom. It's just better to keep my heart hard and not get hurt again." So who knew that was going on in his head? I thought
Yeah.
we were arguing over football practice. I was completely clueless to what the real issue was. So again, creating that environment where they can talk to you freely about whatever. And a lot of that happens at bedtime.
Yeah.
You get those soft lights on, especially if they're in a room by themselves. Um, Soft lights on, asking them what their thoughts for the day are, what thoughts are running around your head tonight, and just plan on it's going to take an extra half an hour, 45 minutes before you're back downstairs or whatever, wherever. Um,
Yeah. I found that bedtime and car rides are where when kids want to talk, kids,
yes.
teenagers. I think the car ride sometimes, when you're not face to face, that if they feel like you're there, but they don't have to look you in the eyes.
Right.
And then I started a journal with all my kids when they were about 9. And just this is a place where we can write back and forth. And I leave it on their pillow and then they leave it on my
Good
pillow.
idea.
And some kids love it. Some kids have written, but I have found with our older kids who were adopted, they wrote the really hard questions in the journal. They didn't bring it up face to face. They didn't bring it up in the car. They bring up other things. Like we had a very open relationship, but the things about adoption were often on paper. Like I'm thinking of my birth mom and if she would want me to do this or if this would make her happy or whatever it would be. The journal was just that safe space and a safe space for me to write them back and then say, if you want to talk about this face to face, I would love to. I'm open to that. And usually, strangely enough, they wouldn't choose that. They would still choose to
Mm,
write back and forth. But it's just been a sweet thing for my older kids uh, and to see them develop. Our daughter, she's 23. She was home this fall and sitting on the couch one day, and she made a comment to our biological daughter saying, when I have kids someday, I won't bring them back here as much as you'll bring your kids back here. And I was kind of listening and I was like, well, why would that be? You would just choose not to? And she said, well, no, I just feel like, you and dad, you would want to see your biological grandkids more than you would your adopted grandkids. And I was like, what? Why? Why? But I thought she's thinking she's 23 years old and she's processing these things and in a serious relationship, thinking about kids probably for the first time seriously. And it's just those things that, again, as adults that they're processing and thinking about. And um, that we just have to be, like you said, willing to have the conversations, open to have the conversations and creative and how we can have those conversations
yeah.
if they aren't comfortable.
Because it's
So,
surprising what they think of. It's
yes.
truly stuff I would never think of.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
I
also
don't
heard
think
you.
they really appreciate how much they're loved. It's like they have a lens of rejection on and they just don't appreciate how much they're really loved. And sometimes they'll act like little toads for an extended period of time. So every day you're like, oh, here we go again. you know, and they might think, my mom doesn't really love me. And it's not that. It's I don't love the lying. I don't love the stealing. I don't love the rebellion. I absolutely am crazy about you.
Yeah.
And they get it very confused.
Mm. Yeah.
Lots of conversations
Yes. And reassurance, that those
and
reassuring words
reassurance.
and conversations of also a lot of our 2 out of our 3 that are now adult adopted children, they don't understand emotions the same way. And so, if mom's mad, my kids
Right.
can walk in and they can tell mom's mad. These kids can't tell. Like the body language isn't there, the reading of body language. And so that goes for the negative things like mom's upset right now. I have to say, I am upset right now. And this is why, but also the positive things to know like mom absolutely loves you. And I have to say those things more. And I don't think it's because they
Mhm.
need it. I think it's because they really just don't feel it from
They
me
don't see it.
the way. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Our kids came with very, um they had no facial expressions. I think we would call it flat affect. There was just nothing. You'd pick them up and their little legs would hang straight down. It did not occur to them with their legs encircle you and hang on like a little koala bear, like little kids do, right? They just hang flat like a fish. Um, and then their ability to read a room, read body languages, read facial expressions, they had none of that. So it wasn't that they couldn't tell I was mad. It was like I had to be happy or I was mad. There was nothing else. If I did, the little frown because you're trying to think or ponder, oh, she's mad. Don't ask her for anything. She's mad. It's like, I'm not, I'm thinking. And I can't fake all of this all the time.
Yeah.
Sometimes I just have to like, what? So that's when we had to really intentionally work on what body language was, what facial expressions were, what emotions were and gradations of emotions. And just because somebody's irritated or frustrated, yes, that is a form of anger, but it's way on the low end that just says, this is inconvenient, like having a little rock in my shoe. It's inconvenient, but it's not harming me. And I'm going to deal with it in a second.
Yeah. Understanding the sad often looks mad, but, for the
Yeah.
kids, but also from the parents, they read it that way and not the
Yeah.
understanding. Yeah. I also heard you say that grief is like a backpack. What do you mean by that?
Oh, um, in many instances, I've talked to children about grief, some that had nothing to do with adoption. And they would talk about how grief just felt like it was going to smother them. And I would tell them it's like a backpack, but it weighs 150 pounds. And when you're 8, you cannot pick it up by yourself. It is yours to carry. It's your grief. But when it's too much, we get people around to help us. But as you get bigger and you get older, it's still gonna be there, it's still gonna weigh 150 pounds, but you're gonna be stronger. You're gonna develop muscles to carry that backpack. You're gonna learn how to stand up so you can get it off the ground. You're gonna learn how to change your gait so you can walk and carry it, and eventually, you will not feel the weight of it, but just barely. And, kids that have come back to me a couple of years later, have said, "Yeah, I have learned to live with this. It doesn't go away. It's not something that you get over a loss. It's that you learn to live in spite of it. And there are times when it appears on your horizon or right in the middle of your day. And there are times when you don't notice it so much. Um, they're always amazed that they can still have so much joy at the same time that grief is present. Lots of good memories that come back and seem to lighten that little backpack for a little while.
Yeah. Yeah. So thinking about that, thinking about our role as adoptive parents, what would you say? How would you finish the sentence? What youth who are adopted really need is.
They really need to know that there is a safe place they can talk to you about anything. They don't even have to have all the words right or the tone of voice right. They can say anything and you will listen and take them seriously. The issues that a child has in their heart at any age are the same issues in an adult's heart. We all want to know that we matter. We all want to know who we are. We all are trying to make sense out of what's going on in our life. We're all looking for hope. We're looking for love and to be loved, and we're looking for help with our problems. Those are universal for all people. And so to be able to listen to a child and to care for their soul, I think is the greatest expression of love we can have for them. to know that I not only care about getting you to soccer, which is your joy of today, I not only care about your education, which is going to help you with your future tomorrow, I care with the inmost part of you, the eternal part of you. And I want to help you.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you, Pam, for sharing your wisdom and sharing these things. If somebody's listening, an adoptive mom, dad is listening, and they're saying, I get these things, but my child is really struggling with adoption, with attachment, with grief in through adoption. What would you suggest they do if it's kind of like beyond their scope of understanding or feeling like they can help within their home?
Well, I'm part of a group of biblical counselors, so we're trained to work with children in that area through the gospel and through scripture. And I find there to be a great amount of hope for kids there because I worked with one little guy who was 11 and he was so brilliant. I kept thinking, I've got to go back to watching educational TV, not so much masterpiece theater in order to keep up with this little kid. Um, but I was talking to him about where his life began and who has the recipe card for how to make you. And he came up with, well, God, he's the creator. He's the one who made me. And I said, yes. So where did your life begin? And he said, it began in the mind of God. I said, it was so much bigger than who your biological or your adoptive parents are. You have a story so much bigger. And then he looked at me and he goes, and one day it will end before the face of God. And so I need to live in a way that pleases and glorifies him. And I said, yes, now we're on the right track. And so I think it was really helpful for him. But I think reading what you can, there's a lot out there that's um, confusing and sounds wise, but I don't really think it pans out in my experience of having been through years and years of therapy with my kids. Um, some of those issues dealing with their shame that uh, sometimes they feel like they're just not as valuable as other kids, and it's not true. Where do you get your value from? If I have $100 bill, and I always use that with the little kids because they always think that's a big deal. And I'll hold up a brand new $100 bill. How much is this worth? And they'll be like, oh, it's $100. And I'll take it outside with them and we'll stomp on it and rub it in the ground and get it wet. And it's all gnarly looking. I say, how much is it worth now? Well, it's still $100. Yeah, its value hasn't changed. Life's been hard to it, but its value hasn't changed because somebody else determined its value. Who determines yours? And that sparks good conversations that really go to the core of what they're talking about when it comes to identity and value, what they're learning about themselves as they're going through hardship, because every single life has hardship. And they'll tell me, but I didn't pick this. And I'll say, do you think the child born blind picked it?
Hmm.
Or the child born in a refugee camp picked it? None of
Yeah.
us pick our
Yeah.
life, but we all are accountable to live it well.
Yeah.
So when it comes to resources, I would go to biblicalcounseling.com personally and look for a biblical counselor.
Yeah. Yeah, I often tell my, again, without sharing too much, I have a couple of kids who I feel they've struggled, but they have accepted and sovereignty, just who they are as adults, who they are as people. They've accepted their adoption as their story. And I have one child who just really does not seem like they have accepted that yet. And the exception is their outlet is going to people who are negative about adoption and negative about their stories on Instagram and social media. And so I'm always sending the opposite. I think there's a healthy thing in talking with other people who have been adopted if you've been adopted. But there can also be a danger in that if it's all just
Exactly.
negative voices and if it's not
Yes.
positive. Like this is the life that you have been given to live, like you said. And now you have a choice. You have a choice and it's not saying we don't have empathy, sympathy, compassion for them. It's not saying just get over it. But it is
No,
like you have to at some point not want that to define who you are and what your future is going to be. And if you're letting it, then it's going to go on for years, and that's
there's
kind of what
no
we've
help in
seen.
a lie. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's no help in a lie. It's only if they get the truth that then they can start to move forward. There's a scripture in the Bible that says God set places the lonely in families, and a child left alone is a lonely person. They have no help. At the age of 4, 5, or 6, they're not equipped to go out and function in the adult world, and they need help. And I've told my kids adoption is God's act of mercy to you. You have received mercy from the Lord. I've received mercy as He's given me you to care for. So it is very hard when they won't accept the adoption. They really do have to adopt you back and say, okay, you can be my mom. And sometimes it's just, can I just be the mom that you have right now? Could we just not fight today about who's going to be in charge? Can we just not argue about everything today? Yeah. Will you just let me love you?
It is. And the motto behind America's Kids Belong is we want kids to feel that they belong. We want them to feel that whether they're in foster care, whether they're reunited with their biological families, or whether they're adopted. We want them to feel that they
Yeah.
belong, because that's a feeling that we all want. We want to feel accepted and that we have belonging. So
I think that's a
thanks.
real calling of every human heart is where do I belong?
Yeah.
And to know that you are displaced from where you think you belong has got to be a very frightening feeling. But if there's people there that are willing to help you, to hold you, to encourage you, to listen to you, to provide you with the things you need so that you can learn and grow and go forward and point you in a path forward, I think in the end you will love them and be grateful to them and attached to them as people who really spoke life into me at my darkest time, even if I was only 4 at the time.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, great things for people to think about. And so just encourage people to, consider these things, think about these things, be willing to have these conversations with your kids because they're thinking it. So if you don't have it,
They
they're going to
are
be
thinking it.
figuring it out on their own, or but asking other people if you're not willing to go there to have these
Yeah.
conversations. Thanks
And it's a
again.
wonderful bonding time with them. They're sharing their deepest heart questions with you. They've let you in. And a lot of those times, I just ask more questions instead of providing so many answers right away because they're open and they're vulnerable and they're not defended against trying to keep all of their secrets on the inside. They're really willing to share. So, yeah, talk, listen, ask questions.
Great things to think about. So thanks again, Pam. We enjoyed our
Thanks,
conversation with
Courtney.
you.
Absolutely my pleasure.
So, our guest today, Tyler Hunter, spent 12 years in kinship care and then spent 4 years in foster care before being adopted at age 16. He's currently a grad student working on his MA in social work with a focus on bringing a clinical dimension to his advocacy. Tyler does behavioral health and child welfare consulting and has volunteered for Kentucky Kids Belong on their I Belong project video shoots. Tyler has an enormous amount of insight and lived experience in the foster care and adoption space. He also has a lot of encouragement for both kids in foster care and foster parents. Let's go way back and talk about what your childhood was like and kind of what stood out from those memories as you think back.
For sure, for sure. Well, I was born in the 1900s, you all.
Let's go. Yep.
So, immediately after I was born, the state swooped in because my biological mother was a current addict at the time, and obviously was, unfit to, raise, any kids. So my great aunt and uncle, which would be her aunt and uncle, my grandmother's brother and his wife, they were already foster parents, and they became my kinship providers. So, the local CPS was already familiar with them. They were already an approved home. It was family placement, and we weren't putting the kid in foster care. We were putting them with family. However, that's still under the out of home care umbrella. So interestingly enough, they were in a religion that was, extremely strict. I wasn't able to, celebrate birthdays and holidays. I remember as a kid having to, leave the room when we had, Valentine's Day party or,
Mhm.
birthday parties. And that was really hard to, explain to kids as well as, how come you don't live with your mom and dad? How come you don't know your dad? Why don't your parents come to eat lunch with you, for Thanksgiving lunch and those things? So I, began or I learned how to mask. So, I, as you can tell, have amazing energy. um, and I learned at a young age how to manipulate, and create an image that was just not real. That way, people would not ask those types of questions. So I was the funny kid. You know, Tyler is funny. He's gonna say something funny, something crazy. We all love him. So we're gonna give him more grace. So when he tries to pivot, when we're asking him
Mm,
those tough questions, we're just gonna, it's gonna just fly over us. And looking back, I'm like, man, like, a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 7-year, 8-year-old, they should not have to learn how to, use that tactic as survival at school and survival at home as well. But just, that's the fact that I had to learn that, was now looking back, I'm like, man, that wasn't normal at all. It
mm,
wasn't normal for me to have to wake myself up,
mm,
every day, get my, own self dressed and go to school. So that looked like, me wearing the same clothes sometimes, or, the clothes didn't really match. However, again, I would try to mask, and whenever people would make comments like, hey, you wore that, the day before yesterday, or, that shirt's not clean, I was again just able to mask. But obviously, that didn't make me feel great whatsoever, because I knew that I was different from my peers, and I again, it was a it was a learning experience, but also a very traumatic experience for me. And it's not something that I think any child should have to go through. And at the time, I knew that it wasn't normal, but I also accepted that way of normality for me.
mhm,
And I would often, create this imaginary world, that I would venture into, would disassociate,
mhm,
especially during those difficult moments. And in my imagination, I had a mom and dad. I lived with my siblings. I had enough food and clothing and all these great things, and life was perfect. So honestly, that saved me during those times because it helped me like get through those rough times, and it always gave me motivation. Like, hey, I don't know what you're going to do in life. I don't know what you're going to be in life, but you're going to be, grand, because
mm,
you don't have a limited imagination. Like your imagination ranges from, east to west, north to south. It's never ending. And that was
mm,
something that other people also noticed in me, especially the adults at my, elementary school. They would always say like, you're going to be famous one day. You're going to be on TV. You're going to be special. Like you have that, like you got it. All right. Out of all
mhm.
these kids here, look, you the one who got it. um, and they really looked out for me at school. I would walk into class, and my locker, I would have snacks, for the week. I would walk in and I would have clothes, new shoes and shirts. I would have, when field trips came along, the PTO association, the school administration, along with the, I want to say like the guidance counselor and the school interventionist, created a plan that, hey, if there's ever a situation to where he needs, a parent signature, we've already okayed it with guardians that someone here can sign his permission slip so he can go to school. So he can, we used to have agendas back in the day, and every single day your parents had to initial them or sign off on them. That way they knew what was going on. For me, that person was the lunch lady that I went to every single morning. And she would sign off, and she would just make sure, like, hey, you wrote this assignment down. Did you get it done? Hey, I have some snacks. Do you need snacks? So like school, and this is why I love school, because school was always, a safe community for me. It was
Mm,
healthy. I was able to, plug in and, receive some of that same energy that I was, trying to give out. And it really helped build me up. And it's literally a huge reason as to why I'm here today.
Yeah, I love that. You makes it just pause, and if there's a teacher listening, to realize the impact they have,
hmm,
For
what they can
sure.
do. And we've got a foster placement right now who the school just loves him so well. And I see a brightness in his eyes when a teacher makes a comment or somebody, the people know, they all know him. I walk through the hallways with him and everybody's greeting him. Everybody's making him feel that. And they know his story. And so they understand, but they're doing it in just such a genuine way that makes him just feel special. And it sounds like you
For
had that.
sure.
And so,
Definitely, definitely. It was the teachers, the guidance counselors, the secretary at the front desk, the lunch ladies, the custodians. They really rallied around me to create this community for me. That every time I walked into that school, I was safe. I was going to be fed. I was going to be nurtured.
Hmm.
Um, I had a person to or people to go to. My guidance counselor wasn't there. There was a backup person. Like there was an intervention plan, and they thoroughly executed it. I'm very appreciative of that now because now I'm working on my clinical degree and licensure, and treatment plans are a guiding force for us
Hmm.
when it comes to treating a person. And I'm like, man, they really rallied together. It was collaborative. It was inclusive, and they didn't know my full story. They knew things were going on at home. Because in my culture, you don't go and tell all your business. That's Black
Hmm.
culture,
Yep.
because if you do, someone can get in trouble at home. And that was good. We need to limit the risk. So you don't disclose anything unless you're asked. And if you are asked, made to disclose information, you better give just a little bit, okay? Just give just enough, all right?
Hmm. Yeah.
So for them to read between the lines and look at this kid every single day and put the story together, I said a lot without saying a lot, and they were aware of that. So I have a huge appreciation for those individuals who work in the school. Doesn't matter if you're a teacher, doesn't matter if you're, again, the lunch lady, the PE teacher, the
Mm.
front desk secretary, everyone that's involved in a child's life is important. The day that I came to my mom, I knew that it was going to be something special. And as I mentioned earlier, as a kid, I always knew that I was going to do great things. Great things were going to happen to me. Didn't know when, didn't know how, didn't know in what shape or form. And at the time, I didn't know this was going to be a forever home. I thought it was just going to be another placement before I went back to my family. So the day I came to my mom, at first I was like, "Ah, okay, I'm back in Bowling Green, which is my city. I'm going to a different, school district. But can this lady really handle me? My mom at the time was 61 years old, which is not old whatsoever. Now looking back, it's not old, but as a 14-year-old, you're like, okay, this is pretty old, you know. And I was just like, I don't know if she can handle me. Like, I don't know. And I wasn't like crazy. But for the day that I stepped, or the moment I stepped foot in our little duplex, 2-bedroom duplex, it was warm. You know, I can I can see the couch in the love seat. I can see the wood paneling. It was brown, and it was a little outdated. But it kind of matched my mom's aesthetic. She's an you know older woman, but a cozy woman. So there wasn't anything fancy in there whatsoever. It was very just welcoming, warm, and inviting. And like I said, I didn't know at the time this was going to be my forever home. But I didn't know how long I was going to be here, but I knew that it was another safe place. I was with a Black person and a Black family. And she seemed to genuinely care about me because what she did do that I did experience in my other placements was try to get to know me.
Mm.
You know, what do you like to do? What do you like to eat? What type of friends do you like to be around? Do you like to play sports and all these other great things? And I'm just like, I really didn't know how to answer them. I was a little uncomfortable just because no one had ever asked me outside of, school, but no one had ever asked me these things. So I'm saying just enough, just to kind of, check the box and like have that conversation, but I'm not being too open because, I can't be vulnerable because I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if I'm going to, piss you off and you're going to, kick me out and don't
Hmm.
know. So I have to protect myself, which means that I have to limit, my vulnerability or openness to you.
Mm.
So, she tried her hardest, and she succeeded into connecting me into things that I like to do. And it was the first time that I felt normal, in my life. Like I was normal like the other kids, I got to do things. I had a cell phone, and I got to have friends, and people although people try to ask me those questions like about my parents, I didn't get them as much because he was a black person, so this has to be someone he's related to.
Yeah.
Mom, grandma, auntie,
Yeah.
like come on, so we're not gonna ask. Like that it's who
Right.
like at this point, who doesn't live with their grandparents, or aunt or uncle. Like this is high school now. Like
Mhm.
we know shit happens at home now. Okay. So
Mhm.
it was the first time again, I just felt normal. My mom was the oldest of 11 kids. So everyone's married, everyone has kids. And this was something that was kind of foreign to me because I come from a big family, but not a family that was so connected like this. I mean, they did everything together. They went to church together. They went on. My uncle was one of the basketball coaches at the high school that I went to. They all showed up to support him at the games, and we I don't know, just random fish fries down at my granddad's house. And oh, we're going down to granddaddy's house. What's the occasion? Oh, he just wants some fish. So we're all going down there and having a fish fry, you know, in this little trailer. And like outside is with a big yard. And, we're all out there, with our tables and chairs, a big old picnic. And, there's a pot, they got some grease in it, frying the chicken and frying the fish. Like, nice little time. And I'm just like, these people are weird. I have like, what black people do this? Like, this is possible in our in my black culture. I'm actually experiencing this, and it took me a long time to get comfortable with that because it was just so foreign for me. So with that came like a lot of resistance, and there were some people who experienced me in that season who um they didn't get to experience, a healthy version of me. That was a kid who was resistant to kind of some of the redirection or prompting that you gave him. And it rubbed people the wrong way, So I often found myself, getting into verbal altercations with some of my family members. Um, but that was something that I think is kind of normal. Just teenagers, we're going through puberty and whatnot. But for me, it was just heightened because I'm the outsider here, right? So yeah, so there came to a point in time to where I was informed that hey, you won't be going back home with your parents or with your family. We had tried, reunification with your biological mom. She wasn't showing up to appointments and wasn't answering phone calls. We tried to, get you reunified with a relative. That didn't happen. Your uncle, that didn't happen. So at this point, we're looking at adoption. My heart sunk because
Yeah.
this was just, and I was told this during a weekly check in with my case manager. Girl, you're supposed to just come and ask me how are things going. I'm your easy case, okay? How's school? You good? You got food? I know your mama's feeding you because I just talked to her. I know, you're good. So for you to give me this news, in the middle of the day, outside in the parking lot of my school, I was like, wow, this is crazy. Like, am I ever gonna like why me? Like, am I ever gonna just be safe? Am I ever gonna be
Mm.
able to, not just have to worry? Is that part of my brain ever gonna be turned off? Will it? So I'm like, damn, they didn't ask me or anything. And I'm just like, do you guys know who? Like what family? Like what's going on? What are we doing? And of course they didn't. And now I understand because I understand like how that works. Not saying that that's the most appropriate thing to do, but I remember just being devastated, and I remember just going home after that. And one thing that my mom did, she always made sure that when I got home from school, there was a meal cooked. Wasn't always the best meal. Sometimes I'm like, I just walked out. I just got off the bus. Why are we eating already? Like, and we would eat together. So, I remember, she could tell that something was like going on with me. Like something had like shook me up because I was real quiet. I mean, I couldn't even hold my head up to talk. And she asked me, is everything okay? And, 15-year-old me, everything's fine. I'm good, What do you mean? And then she's like, you sure? I'm like, well, actually, I met with my case manager, and my case manager told me that I was going to be put up for adoption, and she was like, wow, like, are you serious? And I was like, yeah, she says that I've been in foster care too long and this is the next step. So there was probably a dead period about 10 to 15 seconds, when I was, by this time, like, my plate in my hand is shaking, my fork is shaking, and the words came out of my mouth, will you adopt me? And, I think she was like in mid bite almost. And she just stopped and she was like, you want me to adopt you? Of course I'll adopt you. Like, yeah,
Wow.
I'll talk to your case manager tomorrow and let her know. And, I was just like internally like, oh, thank you, Lord Jesus, hallelujah. Woo! Dodge the bullet there. No. But
That's a bullet.
but the fact that this had like, like and at the time I didn't notice, like this is something that she had wanted. She was 61 years old. Imagine being 61 years old and having the opportunity to have kids, being robbed from you because of a health diagnosis. Imagine being
Yeah.
the oldest of 11 kids and, being the caretaker for all these nieces and nephews, when their parents are at work or on vacation when they need you because you don't have kids.
Mhm.
So imagine seeing that, but never being able to experience that. So, it was an opportunity for me to, have a mom, but also an opportunity for her to have a son. So
Yeah.
that process, that transition for me, it wasn't really, anything difficult as far as the adoption transition because from the day I stepped in through the front door, I was treated as if I had been there my whole entire life. You
Yeah.
know, I was, hey, that's my auntie, this is my uncle, this is my cousins, this is my granddaddy. They didn't say, oh, this is our foster, a
Hmm.
nephew. None of that. This is family. He is family.
Wow. I
So that
love it.
transition for me, it wasn't anything, super hard whatsoever. But the hard part for me was, again, learning how to be vulnerable and learning how to let people love on me, learning how to
Mm.
be comfortable with people wanting to celebrate me because it was something that I had just not been ever really exposed to, something that I didn't think that I was capable of receiving. So
Mm.
when the time, those moments when I was receiving it, I was very resistant. I wanted to do anything and everything to make you not love me. I wanted to be the most unappealing thing, kid to where you're like, pack up that bag and y'all come pick them up, come get them, come get them
Mhm.
because that's the part of my brain that was activated. And it was very dominant and it drove my behaviors and thoughts. And even when I didn't, even when I wanted to be, vulnerable, I couldn't. When I wanted to say,
Mhm.
I love you, I couldn't. I don't know what
Mm.
that force was. I just couldn't do it. It was so uncomfortable for me. And it wasn't, I I will say it wasn't until when I was about 19 years old when I really got into my forgiveness era because, well, I realized that, hey, like in order to accept these new things over here that this foster care experience has given you, you got to let go of these old things, right? So
Right.
old keys don't unlock new doors, right? Right. And I think that's why we did the foster care was so damaging for me because a a lot of people, families, they have trouble, accepting the change, accepting the gift.
Right.
It's truly a gift. And when you don't accept it, you meet it with resistance. And then you start fragmenting the relationships and networks and, self-sabotaging yourself. So at age
Mm.
19, I realized, man, there's a person to where, this anger, this feeling of abandonment is really centralized on. And I have to learn how to forgive them. And I have to actually do it. It can't be a thought anymore. And that person was my biological mom. And I remember,
Mm.
I was in my own apartment at the time. Actually, I was 18, not 19. And I had just called her randomly. And I said, hey, I just want to let you know that I forgive you, you know, and I was like broken down in tears because here I was having to forgive a person who I didn't know if they were sorry. a person who hasn't apologized to me for what the things that they've done to me, abandoning me, not showing up for me, a person who I don't know if they're gonna, even accept the or appreciate the fact that I'm forgiving them. But I've learned that forgiveness is for yourself. It's not for the other person. And forgiveness is the starting point to help you heal and move on to again accept these gifts. So from there, I was able to fully or try to fully accept my family, my adopted family, and my mom, and try to embrace her a little more. And I was starting to be more intentional. Now, I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't, every single day, I love you, hey, give me a hug, none of that. But it looked like me talking to her every single day. Me
Mm-hmm.
going talking about a house every single day. Me initiating conversations with her and not waiting for her to initiate conversations, and just me being more open about things that were going on with my life at the time. And I was dating this girl at the time and just being truthful to like allow my mom to, pour into me and give me advice. She has wisdom from her experience. Let her pour into me and help guide me. Like I'm a very strong-minded and independent person, but that's what a mother's job is to do, and it's to lead her son and guide her
Mm-hmm.
son. And I was able to, start letting her do those things. And again, it was a little abnormal for me, and it took time for me to, just get more comfortable with that. And it wasn't until she passed, the day she passed away, that I was like, man, I've wasted so many like days, moments of being too afraid, honestly, being afraid for me to be vulnerable with her, for her to really see me. And she saw me, and there were times where she pressed and pressed, and I was so resistant that she stopped. But I'm like, man, I wish that I could have just let her in. Because now, at 21, when she passed away, this is when I feel like I needed her the most. Because now I'm like I'm this young, trying to be a young adult, navigating the world of, just the world of the world. How do I do my taxes?
Yeah.
How do I call this doctor to make an appointment?
Mm-hmm.
Like, hey, they said I got to write a check. Do you remember how to write a check? So those things, as well as, those emotional things, like, man, I got put out of school because of, my academics, and my mom's not here. Like, I can't talk to her about it. And, she can't love on me and ask me what's going on. I don't have a place to go to just sit on the couch until I go to work, or just because I'm off work, sit on the couch and her couch and watch Netflix, things that we used
Mm-hmm.
to do. And I can remember, well, I can count on one hand how many times I have initiated, saying I love you to my mom in our duration of, 8 years together, of almost 8 years together. And that's something that sticks with me. And it's something that I try to encourage, young people and even adopted and foster families, that you truly like an authentic relationship with your kids is extremely healthy and needed, because again it's a driving force to us kids who have been placed in foster care, um to either, for lack of words, go right or go left,
Yeah.
you know so that's, that experience also of her death, it also propelled me into being more intentional with the things that I do when it comes to advocacy. Being more intentional with showing up to meetings and being a leader and coming with ideas and changes for, policy and regulations. And when I'm in speaking engagements, speaking to the foster parents and the staff to uplift them, not demonize them whatsoever. We know there's a lot of things that's going wrong in this system, called child foster care, right? Or out of home care system. But there's also a lot of things that are going extremely well, and it's not fair for us to not highlight those things, because here I was, a kid who was always, told the things I was doing wrong. You have a smart mouth, you're too grown, or, all these negative things. And I didn't hear a lot from my family. You're amazing, you're bright, you are intelligent, you are going somewhere, you're going to be somebody one day. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
hear those things. And I think it's just as important for parents and families to hear those things as it is for kids to hear those things. Because if they don't hear these things, then they can't tell their kids, right? So it
Right.
again, it just kind of reinstates that that multi-generational like process or system of like trauma. That's how we break trauma. That's how we break generational curses. That's how we break, maladaptive behaviors. We have to try new healthier methods. And part of it is thinking differently and speaking differently to ourselves and to each other.
Well, thanks for this inspiring conversation. Really amazing your story and your journey, the energy and light that your life shows and casts into places that have shadows. And yeah, thanks for being on with us today.
For sure. Thank you all so much for allowing me to be on this platform. And, thank you for allowing those with experience to be on this platform. This is a great way to amplify, our voice and the need and the great works that are happening. So thank you all so much for that.
I'm confident that you enjoyed those conversations as much as I did, and hopefully you gained a lot of insights and thoughts and conversations that maybe you need to have with kids or start with your children who maybe have been adopted for a little bit or have been in your home for a long time. I want to remind you that it takes a lot of resources and time to make content like this. And so if you are interested in helping fund our mission, I encourage you to go to our website, americaskidsbelong.org, and click donate, or you can use this QR code with your camera, scan it, and it'll take you to that donate location. Even $5, $10, $20 will help us to be able to continue to make content like this. Also, I know a lot of you are here because you want to get CE credit. You need credit for continuing in your foster care journey, maybe even your adoption journey. So if you will need CE credit, you will need to go to fostercon.org, and you will find a little link to fill out a form. You will need to fill out a form for every webinar you watch through us. Find the webinar, give us a little bit of information so we can validate that you listened to it. And also, if you have a partner or spouse, you will both need to fill out the form individually. So again, an hour and a half credit you get for being here today. And lastly, I want to explain to you a little bit more about America's Kids Belong. So if you don't know a lot about us, we have many different projects that we work on, but it is our overall mission to improve the experiences and outcomes for kids in foster care. We have our I Belong project, which is where we film and video kiddos who need an adoptive home. So if that's something you're interested in and listening to this topic, you can find that on our website. FosterCon is what you're part of today. We also have our Foster Friendly podcast. I highly suggest you check that out. We've got great guests on there all the time. Line up past ones, start at the beginning, listen to them all. I can guarantee it'll help you in your fostering or adoption journey. And we also have Foster Friendly Communities, which is an app. You can find more information about that on our website. And then Fostering Front Door is our online database of all the questions we've had over the 10 years of our existence of people asking questions about foster care and adoption. We have all those questions. We have resources. We have links to other organizations. It is just a robust database of tons of information. So if you want more information about foster care, about adoption, go to the Fostering Front Door, which again, all of these things can be found on our app, our website, americaskidsbelong.org. Thanks again for being here.